The Su-47 bucked in the thin, hostile air, its twin rotors beating a frantic rhythm against the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. Inside, Sergeant Anya Sharma sat perfectly still, a small, quiet island in the vibrating chaos of the fuselage. Her rifle case, a scarred and faded pelican, rested across her knees. It was an older model, its latches worn smooth by years of use, a stark contrast to the brand-new, high-speed gear of the Marines around her. They were part of a fast team, redeployed to this forgotten outpost FOB Razer, to provide overwatch for a series of operations in the valley below. They were all hard muscle, sharp jaws, and the easy, arrogant confidence of men who had only ever known the top of the food chain. Corporal Davis, a kid with a neck thicker than his head, nudged his squad mate, PFC Chun. He jerked his chin toward Sharma. "Check out the museum piece," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard over the engine's whine. "Think she's got a musket in there?" Chun snickered. "Probably her dad's. Heard she was a REMF. Poji." They pulled from a desk to fill a slot. Sharma's eyes remained fixed on the churning brown landscape visible through the small porthole window. She didn't react. She had heard it all before. Her file was thin, deliberately so. It listed her as a marksmanship instructor, recently requalified for active deployment. To men like these, that meant she'd spent the last decade drinking coffee and teaching recruits how to zero an M16. It didn't say where she'd been before that. It didn't list the call signs, the operations, or the commendations that were buried under layers of black ink and national security classifications. Their team leader, Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, sat opposite her. He was a man carved from granite and cynicism, his face a roadmap of desert campaigns. He hadn't spoken a single word to her since she was assigned to his unit at Bagram. He just looked at her, then at her rifle case, and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. He hadn't wanted a replacement for his last spotter, who'd been wounded. He certainly hadn't wanted her. Now, he watched her with open skepticism, his gaze lingering on her slim build, her placid expression. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like a librarian who'd taken a wrong turn. The helicopter began its descent, a nauseating corkscrew drop to avoid ground fire. The Marines braced, their bodies tensing with practiced familiarity. Sharma didn't move a muscle. Her center of gravity seemed to be rooted to the floor of the aircraft. She simply watched the ground rush up to meet them, her breathing slow and even. The ramp slammed down onto the gravel of the landing zone, kicking up a blinding storm of dust and pebbles. Rourke was the first one out, bellowing orders. "Davis, Chen, get that gear to the S2 tent. Sharma, with me. Colonel wants a look at you." The way he said "you" was laced with contempt, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment he was being forced to accept. Sharma slung her rifle case over her shoulder, its weight familiar and comforting, and followed him across the windswept expanse of the FOB. Razer was less a base and more a fortified scar on the mountainside. HESCO barriers, triple-stacked and weathered, formed a perimeter. The wind was a constant, physical presence, a high, thin scream that never stopped. It scoured the landscape, carrying with it the grit that got into everything: teeth, weapons, and morale. The command tent was a flurry of controlled chaos. Maps covered every flat surface, and the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and sweat. Colonel Madsen was a wiry man with tired eyes who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He glanced up as Rourke entered, his gaze immediately falling on Sharma. "This is her?" Madsen asked, his voice flat. "Sergeant Sharma, sir," Rourke said, his tone making it clear he was just following orders. "The replacement." Madsen stood and walked around his desk, circling Sharma like a man inspecting a questionable piece of livestock. "Your file says you're a marksmanship instructor, Sergeant. We're at 11,000 feet here. The wind in this valley can change direction 3 times before a bullet travels 1,000 yards. This isn't a 100-meter pop-up range." "I'm aware of that, sir," Sharma said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It seemed to hang in the air, a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the tent. "Are you?" Madsen's skepticism was a mirror of Rourke's. Gunny Rourke's team is the only dedicated overwatch we have for the valley. Their last spotter was one of the best. Took a round through the shoulder because the wind shear at the pass caught him by surprise. You understand the stakes? Yes, sir. Madsen sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine. Gunny, take her to the range. Get her zeroed. I want to know if she can even hit the broad side of a mountain from here. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his maps before she was even out of the tent. Outside, the wind howled, whipping Sharma's loose strands of hair across her face. Rourke grunted. You heard the man. Range. Let's see what they taught you in garrison. He led her to the far end of the FOB, where a makeshift range had been carved into the hillside. A few steel targets were set up at varying distances, the farthest a small silhouette at 800 yards, barely visible in the shimmering afternoon heat. Davis and Chun were already there, setting up a spotting scope with a theatrical slowness, their smirks communicating everything. This was the test, the ritual hazing, the moment where the newcomer was either broken or, at the very least, put firmly in their place. Sharma felt the familiar weight of their judgment. It was a pressure she had learned to use, to convert into focus. She knelt and unlatched her pelican case. The inside was not what they expected. There was no gleaming, state-of-the-art rifle with a carbon fiber stock and a digital scope. Instead, nestled in the custom-cut foam, was a heavily modified M40A5. The rifle was a veteran, its stock worn and smooth in the places where her hand and cheek had rested for thousands of hours. The barrel was thick and matte black, the action polished to a dull sheen from use. It was a tool, not a trophy. Bolted to the top was a Schmidt and Bender scope, its glass pristine. Davis whistled, a low, mocking sound. Damn, Gunny, that's an antique. My grandpa had one of those. Rourke just grunted, his arms crossed. Let's see it shoot, Sergeant. Target is the 800-yard steel. Wind is gusting 15 to 20 miles per hour. Full value, coming left to right down the valley. Mirage is a bitch. Go ahead. He said it like he was daring her. He expected her to struggle with the calculations, to blame the conditions, to make excuses. He expected her to fail. Sharma said nothing. She assembled her rifle with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. Each piece clicked into place with a quiet snick. She pulled a small device from her pack, a Kestrel weather meter, and held it up, her eyes scanning the digital readout. Then she looked past the meter at the world itself. She watched the way the heat shimmered off the rocks, the way the fine dust danced in the air, the way the tall grass on the distant ridge bent and swayed. The Kestrel gave her data. The world gave her the truth. She lay prone, settling the rifle into the pocket of her shoulder. She didn't rush. She adjusted the bipod, built a small, stable platform for the stock with her rear bag, and eased behind the scope. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat a steady, distant drum. The world narrowed to the circle of light in her eyepiece. Rourke was getting impatient. Any decade now, Sergeant. Through the scope, the 800-yard target was a wavering silhouette, distorted by the mirage. The wind was a river, unseen but powerful, with currents and eddies she had to feel rather than see. She took the Kestrel's data, factored in the altitude, the humidity, the temperature, the spin drift of the 175-grain bullet. Then she added her own hold, a correction born not from a chart but from a deep, instinctual understanding of ballistics. An understanding etched into her soul by a decade spent in places that didn't officially exist. She adjusted the elevation turret with a series of precise clicks. Then the windage. She settled the crosshairs not on the target, but a space several feet to its left and slightly high, a patch of empty air where the wind would carry her bullet. Her world went silent. The howling wind, the muttering of the Marines behind her, the distant thrum of a generator. It all faded away. There was only the breath, the trigger, and the space between here and there. She exhaled slowly, and in the natural respiratory pause that followed, her finger tightened on the trigger. The break was clean, a surprise even to her. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a familiar, violent kiss. She was back on target in a fraction of a second, watching the vapor trail of the bullet bend and snake through the air on its long journey. For a moment, it looked like she had missed by a mile. Davis started to laugh. Then, a full second and a half after the shot, a faint ping drifted back to them on the wind, followed by the sight of the steel target rocking on its stand. Perfect centermass hit. Davis's laugh died in his throat. Chun lowered his binoculars, his mouth slightly agape. Rourke's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed his eyes. He squinted at the target, then back at Sharma, who was already cycling the bolt, her face impassive. "Lucky shot," Rourke grunted, refusing to concede. "Do it again." Sharma didn't answer. She was already watching the wind, feeling its subtle shifts. She adjusted her hold slightly, a whisper of movement, and sent another round downrange. Ping. Another hit, less than 2 inches from the first. "All right," Rourke said, his voice tight. "You can shoot. Let's get back to the tent. Don't get comfortable. The real world isn't a steel plate." He turned and strode away, leaving Davis and Chun to stare at Sharma with a new, grudging curiosity. Sharma carefully cleared her weapon, disassembled it, and placed it back in its case. She had passed the first test, but she knew Rourke's dismissal wasn't gone. It had just been buried a little deeper, waiting for a real crisis to reemerge. And in this valley, a crisis was never far away. The next 3 days were a study in cold professionalism. Sharma did her job. She cleaned her rifle, maintained her gear, and spent hours observing the valley from the overwatch post carved into the highest point of the FOB. The post was a sandbagged bunker, barely large enough for 3 people, with a commanding view of the Chronicles Pass, a notorious choke point for coalition forces. Rourke ran the overwatch team with an iron fist. He assigned Sharma the dawn and dusk shifts, the times when visibility was worst and the temperature swings most extreme, making long-range observation a nightmare. He spoke to her only when necessary, his orders clipped and impersonal. Davis and Chun, following their leader's cue, treated her with a detached, wary distance. The mockery was gone, replaced by a professional courtesy that was somehow more insulting. It was the kind of politeness one reserves for a temporary problem. They saw her as a competent shooter on a square range, but untested in the crucible of combat. Her 2 perfect shots were a party trick, not proof of worth. On the 4th day, the crisis arrived. It started with a burst of garbled radio traffic. A platoon from the 101st, call sign Reaper 3, was conducting a reconnaissance patrol deep in the valley, near a network of caves the locals called the Dragon's Teeth. They were tracking a high-value target, a Taliban commander known for his expertise in building sophisticated IEDs. "Contact! Contact! Ambush from the North Ridge. We're pinned down. Taking heavy fire." The voice on the radio was young, panicked. The command tent erupted. Colonel Madsen was at the radio console, his face grim. "Reaper 3, what's your status? Can you identify enemy positions?" Negative, negative. They're dug in deep. It's coming from everywhere. We've got 2 men down." Rourke, Sharma, and Chun were already in the overwatch post, their optics trained on the distant ridge. Through his high-powered spotting scope, Rourke could see the muzzle flashes, tiny, sporadic sparks of light from a series of caves and rock formations nearly 1,400 yards away. The distance was extreme. The wind was a maelstrom, gusting unpredictably through the pass. "I've got muzzle flashes, but no clear targets," Rourke growled into his headset, his voice a low thrum of frustration. "They're using murder holes, shooting from deep inside the caves. We can't get a clean shot." Davis was on the 50 calories, trying to provide suppressing fire, but the heavy rounds were impacting uselessly against the rock face, yards away from the enemy positions. The wind was playing havoc with the trajectory. "Reaper 3, this is Razer Overwatch," Rourke said. "We're trying to suppress. Can you move?" "Negative. Every time we move, they open up with a DSHK. It's got us locked down. We need that gun taken out." Sharma was scanning the ridge with her own scope, her movements calm and deliberate. She wasn't looking for muzzle flashes. She was looking for patterns, for the subtle signs the enemy always left. A heat signature from a barrel, a glint of light off a spotter's lens, the unnatural shadow in the mouth of a cave. "Gunny," she said, her voice even. "I think I have the DSHK. There's a spotter 2 caves to the left of it." Rourke glanced at her, his irritation plain. "You think you have it? We don't have time for guesswork, Sergeant. If you can't confirm a target, you keep your mouth shut." "I have confirmation," she replied, her tone unchanged. "Small cave, 9 o'clock on the main rock formation. There's a glint. Binoculars. He's directing fire." Rourke swung his scope to the position she indicated. He stared for a full 30 seconds, his knuckles white on the focus knob. "I don't see a damn thing. It's a shadow." "It's a man in a shadow," Sharma corrected quietly. On the radio, the situation was deteriorating. "We're taking more casualties. We need that gun silenced now." Matson's voice cut in over the command net. "Rourke, what's your status on that DSHK?" "No joy, sir." Rourke bit out, his frustration boiling over. "The angles are impossible. The wind is tearing us apart. We can't get a solid lock." "Then find one," Matson roared. Rourke slammed his fist against the sandbags. He was failing. His team was failing. The men in the valley were going to die. He looked at Sharma, who was still perfectly calm. Her eye pressed to her scope as if she were watching a bird in a park. Desperation gnawed at him. "You said you have the spotter?" he demanded. "I do," she said. "What's the range?" Sharma didn't consult a laser rangefinder. She checked the milldots in her scope, comparing them to the estimated size of the cave opening. 1,420 yards. Call it 1,300 meters. Davis let out an involuntary scoff. 1,300 meters in this wind? It was a shot for the history books, not for a real-world engagement. Rourke hesitated for a heartbeat. His pride warred with the desperate screams on the radio. Pride lost. "Fine," he spat. "You're so damn sure? Take the shot. But if you miss, you so much as draw their attention, I'll have your stripes." It wasn't an order. It was an abdication. A way to place the blame for the inevitable failure squarely on her shoulders. Sharma didn't acknowledge the threat. She was already working. The wind was gusting up to 30 miles per hour, a full-value crosswind that would push her bullet more than 20 feet to the right. The air was thin, affecting drag. The upward angle to the ridge was steep, changing the effect of gravity. She performed the complex ballistic calculations in her head, a fluid stream of numbers and variables. Elevation, windage, spin drift, Coriolis effect. She dialed 32 minutes of angle onto her elevation turret. Her windage hold was going to be entirely mental. It was too variable to dial. She'd have to hold off in empty space. She settled behind the rifle, her body becoming one with the earth. She let half a breath out and held it. The world vanished. There was only the reticle, the target, and the wind. She could feel the wind on her face, but she could also see it 1,000 yards away. A subtle ripple in the mirage, a swirl of dust rising from a ledge. She held the crosshairs an impossible distance to the left of the cave, what looked like the width of an entire truck. She waited. The wind was a living thing, and she had to fire in the lull between its heartbeats. A gust, then a pause. A second gust, a longer pause. She saw her window, a brief 2-second pocket of relative consistency. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The M40 barked, a sharp, violent crack that was immediately snatched away by the wind. The recoil was a familiar shove. She was back on the scope instantly, watching the bullet's trace fight its way across the valley. It was a tiny, fleeting silver streak, bending on the wind. It looked wrong. It looked like it was going to miss by 100 feet. Rourke was already keying his mic, ready to call the miss. No F. Then, through his scope, the shadow in the mouth of the cave convulsed. The binocular glint vanished. A small puff of rock dust kicked up from the back of the cave, a heartbeat after the spotter collapsed. Silence in the overwatch post. Cheon and Davis were frozen, staring through their optics, unable to process what they'd just seen. On the radio, a new voice from Reaper 3, calmer now. Spotter is down. Repeat, their spotter is down. Rourke slowly lowered his binoculars, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at Sharma. She was already cycling the bolt, her expression unchanged. The DSHK is 2 apertures to the right, she said, her voice as level as a carpenter's plane. He's exposed for a reload. Rourke didn't have time to respond. He just stared as she lined up the second shot. The heavy machine gun was deeper in its cave, a much harder target. But for a few seconds, as the gunner's assistant fed a new belt of ammunition, the gunner's torso was visible. Again, the meticulous process. The breath, the hold, the squeeze. The rifle cracked again. 1,400 yards away, the DSHK gunner was thrown backward, a puppet with its strings cut. The heavy machine gun fell silent. Gun is down. DSHK is down. The radio crackled, the voice now filled with triumphant disbelief. Holy shit. Razer? Who is making these shots? Rourke couldn't speak. He just watched as Sharma, with an unnerving calm, continued to scan the ridge. It was as if she were simply ticking names off a list. There are 2 riflemen in the rocks above the main cave system, she announced. They're providing cover. They think we can't see them. She fired again. The rifleman on the left, who had been peeking over a boulder, disappeared. She cycled the bolt, acquired the second target. Fired. The other rifleman slumped forward, his weapon clattering down the rocks. For shots. For kills. At a distance and in conditions that should have been impossible. Colonel Madsen's voice came over the command net, sharp and urgent. Razer Overwatch report. Who is on that rifle? Rourke finally found his voice, but it was hoarse, strained. Sergeant Sharma, sir. The instructor? Madsen sounded incredulous. Affirmative, sir. A pause. Then the frantic voice from Reaper 3 again. They're breaking. They're retreating back into the main cave, but they've got a command element directing them from a concealed position. We see an antenna, west face of the ridge, in that cluster of boulders. I see it, Sharma said, her voice overlapping the transmission. She had already traversed, her scope finding the new target. This was the most difficult shot yet. The target wasn't a person, but a piece of equipment, partially obscured by rock. More importantly, he was surrounded by at least 7 or 8 other fighters, all taking cover. She couldn't just hit the man. She had to do it without hitting the rocks in front of him, and she had to do it now before he changed position. Gunny, she said, her voice a fraction tighter. I'm going to need you to talk me in. The mirage is boiling off that rock face. Give me corrections after the first shot. Rourke was jolted out of his stupor. She was asking for his help. Him. The man who had dismissed her as a fluke. He snapped his binoculars back to his eyes, focusing on the target area. On it, he said, his voice now crisp, all business. The gunny sergeant had taken over. Sending, Sharma said. The 5th shot was away. Rourke watched the impact. Short. Impacted low, 2 feet below the ledge. The updraft is stronger than it looks. Bring it up 1 full minute. Sharma's fingers flew over her elevation knob. A single, precise click. Up 1. Sending. The 6th shot. Hit. Hit. Target down. Rourke yelled, a raw, primal excitement in his voice. Command element is down. In the valley, the effect was immediate. Without their leader, the remaining enemy fighters panicked. They began a disorganized retreat, abandoning their fortified positions. But Sharma wasn't finished. They're falling back to a pre-planned rally point, she said calmly. There's a natural funnel in the rocks behind the main cave. They'll have to pass through it 1 by 1 inch. Can you hit it? Rourke asked, the question devoid of any skepticism. It was a simple request for information from one professional to another. Yes, she said. And then she began to shoot. It was no longer about single, calculated shots. It was a rhythm, A deadly cadence of fire, bolt, breath, fire. Each crack of the rifle was followed, seconds later, by an enemy fighter falling in the narrow pass. She wasn't aiming for center mass anymore. She was taking them down as they ran, leading them like a skeet shooter, calculating their speed and the bullet's flight time. A running target at over 1,300 meters in a 30 miles per hour crosswind. She hit the first one, then the second. The third fighter, seeing his comrades fall, dove behind a rock. Sharma waited. A minute passed. He must have thought she'd lost him. He broke cover, sprinting for the safety of the deep caves. The rifle cracked. He tumbled and fell. "That's 9, Chen whispered, his voice full of awe. He was counting. 2 more fighters tried to make a run for it, using a different path. Sharma was already there, waiting. 2 shots, so close together they sounded like one. 2 more bodies on the rocks. 11, Chen breathed. The last fighter was clever. He stayed low, crawling, using every bit of cover. He was almost to the safety of the deep crevasse. Sharma watched him through her scope, her breathing steady. He had to cross a 5-foot patch of open ground. He took a deep breath and scrambled. It was all the time she needed. The 12th shot echoed across the valley. The last fighter fell, his momentum carrying him almost to the safety he would never reach. Silence. The ridge was still. The shooting had stopped. Below, Reaper 3 was moving, securing the casualties, their voices on the radio a mixture of relief and utter astonishment. In the Overwatch post, no one moved. Rourke, Davis, and Chun just stared at the silent, empty ridge. 12 targets. 12 hits. Under impossible conditions. It wasn't just marksmanship. It was something else entirely. Something that defied belief. Rourke slowly turned his head and looked at Sharma. She was already pulling the bolt from her rifle, beginning the process of clearing it. Her face was calm, her hands steady. There was no elation, no adrenaline shakes. Just a quiet, focused competence. It was as if she had just finished a routine task, like cleaning her boots. The radio crackled to life. It was a different voice, deeper, calmer. The platoon leader from Reaper 3. Razer command, this is Reaper 3 to 6. Overwatch, be advised, enemy threat is neutralized. We are secure. My thanks to your Overwatch team. That was the finest piece of shooting I have ever witnessed. A pause. Then the officer's voice changed, a note of careful inquiry entering his tone. Just a question, command. That wasn't standard Marine marksmanship. The way he was walking those rounds in, reading the wind, I haven't seen shooting like that since I was a lieutenant attached to Task Force Orange in the Helmand. Is call sign Kestrel on this net? By any chance? The name hung in the air of the tiny bunker. Kestrel. A ghost. A legend whispered about in classified debriefs and late-night bar sessions among special operators. A sniper assigned to a Tier 1 unit, credited with some of the most difficult and politically sensitive eliminations of the war. A shooter who could supposedly make a cold-bore shot from a moving helicopter, who could hit a target from over a mile away in a sandstorm. A name that had faded into myth about 5 years ago. Rourke's blood went cold. He looked from the radio to the quiet woman beside him, who had frozen for a fraction of a second at the mention of the name, her hand hovering over her rifle's bolt. Her mask of placid calm had not slipped, but Rourke saw it in her eyes. A flicker of a past she had buried deep. He picked up his own mic, his throat suddenly dry. Negative Reaper 3 to 6. No such call sign at this station. The shooter was Sergeant Sharma. Good shooting, Sergeant. He said her name with a newfound weight, a tone of profound, undeniable respect. Roger that, Razer, the platoon leader replied, though the doubt was audible in his voice. Well, tell Sergeant Sharma she shoots like a ghost. Reaper 3 out. Silence descended on the Overwatch post again. Thicker this time. Davis and Chun were staring at Sharma, their mouths hanging open. They weren't looking at a REMF anymore. They were looking at a legend. The antique rifle in the worn case wasn't a hand-me-down. It was the instrument of a master, a tool that had likely seen more action than their entire unit combined. Sharma finally finished clearing her weapon, her movements precise and unhurried, though she could feel their eyes on her. She didn't acknowledge the call sign. She didn't have to. The truth was now sitting between them, as solid and real as the sandbags that surrounded them. Rourke stood up slowly. He walked over to the field pack where they kept the extra rations and water. He pulled out a canteen and a sealed packet of coffee, the good instant kind they saved for emergencies. He walked back and placed it gently on the sandbag next to Sharma. He didn't say a word. He just gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture that conveyed more apology, respect, and awe than 1,000 words ever could. Then he turned and went back to his scope, resuming his watch over the valley as if nothing had happened. An hour later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Davis approached her. He was holding a cleaning kit and a soft flannel cloth. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her rifle, which she had laid out on a mat. "Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy, "permission to clean your weapon." In the sniper world, it was the ultimate sign of respect. A shooter's rifle was a sacred object, an extension of their own body. To be trusted to clean it was an honor. Sharma looked at the young corporal, at the genuine reverence in his eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just the carbon on the bolt face. Be gentle with the crown." "Yes, Sergeant," Davis said, his voice filled with gratitude. He knelt down and began to work on the rifle with the care of a surgeon. His earlier arrogance completely burned away. Chun watched from a distance, then quietly went to fetch her a hot meal from the chow hall, delivering it without a word. The dismissal was gone. It hadn't been replaced by loud congratulations or backslapping camaraderie. It had been replaced by a quiet, profound reverence. They had seen something they didn't think was possible. They had witnessed an artist at work, and it had changed them. They had mocked the librarian, and in response, she had shown them the ghost. Later that night, long after her shift had ended, Sharma couldn't sleep. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving behind the familiar, hollow ache. She left her cot and walked to the edge of the FOB, to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. The wind had died down, and the moon was a brilliant silver disk in the ink-black sky, illuminating the jagged peaks and the deep, dark shadows where the day's battle had taken place. She leaned against a Hesco barrier, the rough canvas scratching against her arm. She didn't look at the ridge with pride or satisfaction. She looked at it with the weary eyes of a veteran who understood the true cost of her skills. Each of those 12 shots had been a life, an equation she had solved, a problem she had fixed, but still a life. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn, already knowing who it was. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke came to stand beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just stared out into the vast, silent emptiness of the Afghan night. "The wind is tricky here," Rourke said finally, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact, an admission. "It tells you what it's going to do," Sharma replied, her voice barely a whisper. "If you listen." Rourke nodded slowly, digesting that. "Kestrel," he said, not as a question, but as a quiet acknowledgement. "They said you were out, that you retired." "I tried," Sharma said. It was the most she had ever revealed about herself. The two words were heavy with a history of ghosts and regrets. Rourke understood. Some people were just built for the storm. Putting them in quiet harbors was a cruelty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished brass shell casing. He held it out to her. It was from one of the 308 rounds she had fired. "Figured you might want this," he said. Sharma looked at the casing, then at his outstretched hand. She didn't take it. "It's just brass, Gunny," she said. "The work is what matters." Rourke looked at the casing in his own hand, then closed his fist around it. He understood that, too. It wasn't about trophies. It was about the act itself. The quiet, perfect execution of an impossible task. He slipped the casing back into his pocket. A souvenir. A reminder of the day he saw a living myth at work. "Colonel Madsen wants you in the command tent for the debrief at 0600, he said, his tone back to its usual gruffness, but the underlying respect was now unmistakable. "He wants to know how you did it." "I'll tell him I got lucky," she said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips for the first time. Rourke almost smiled back. "Yeah, 12 times. He stood there with her for another minute, sharing the silence. Then, with another short, sharp nod, he turned and walked back toward the barracks, leaving her alone with the moon and the mountains. Anya Sharma remained, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the first hint of dawn was beginning to break. The sky was turning from black to a soft, bruised gray. A new day was coming, a day filled with the same wind, the same mountains, and the same work. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, the cold air a welcome, familiar sting. The respect was a quiet warmth, but it was the cold she trusted. The cold was what kept you sharp. It was what kept you alive. And for a ghost, that was all that mattered.